I'll focus only on Kulik and Natalia, unfortunately excluding Joanna Helander, who's a brilliant photographer and could be a part of this paper if I had like 1 hour and not 20 minutes. So basically, these artists are very famous and they are not really friends, even though I exhibited them sometimes together. But I will try to follow them and focus on their works from the 70s, and then we'll make we'll press the fast forward and we'll go to the 90s to see what happened later with their feminist attitudes, but also involvement in some kind of communist context. So the first one will be Kulik. It's just, okay, yeah. So this is the duo that was established by a couple, by Przemysław Kwiek and Zofia Kulik. And we have this child that is gazing into the lens. And this is Maksymilian Dobromierz, son to two artists, Zofia Kulik. She's born in 1947, by the way, and Przemysław Kwiek is born in 1945. So from 1971 to 1987, they worked together as the Kwiek-Kulik duo. Writing about their work, art historian Luckus has stated that, quote, activities with Dobromierz was an effort to relate mathematical and logical operations where non-material symbols such as X, Y, and Z are used to analogical operations but using material forms, which is to say objects, textures, and colors, with the inclusion of specific existing factors of life, end of quote. So, in other words, Kwiek-Kulik took their personal experience of being both parents and artists, restricted by bureaucracy and at the mercy of the communist authorities, and they translated it into the language of art. In this sense, the activities with Dobromierz series not only serves to prove, as Ronduda notes, that given a limited number of spatial relationships between objects, it is possible to produce an unlimited number of what he calls aesthetic time effects. It also serves as a record of the artist's material situation and their state of consciousness. Zofia Kulik has written about activities with Dobromierz, saying that, quote, activities with Dobromierz came to a natural end as the child grew up. In 1975, she noted again that it's a pity we didn't beginning to the quote. When combining our parents' duties with our artistic work, we create many and varied juxtapositions of our son and everyday objects, containers and surfaces in spatial situations in our flat. And while we are out on a walk, and we record each of these juxtapositions on slides, end of quote. Here, material want is fused with Kwiek's and Kulik's ideological positions with their left-wing views. They were too radical for the conformist Communist Party, which actually rejected their applications several times in the 70s. As opposed to a great many works springing from the conceptual art stream, there is no elimination of either color or form in activities with Dobromierz. Indeed, the form, albeit minimalist, endows a number of the images with a surrealistic atmosphere. Maksymilian Dobromierz is used to create a work of art as methodical as it is objective, and the controversial symbol of the series, which Zofia Kulik transformed into a 3-channel video show in 2008, is the Dobromierz popping up out of the toilet bowl, his curious gaze fixed on the camera lens. In retrospect, the artist's use of their own child to carry out operations analogical to those performed by mathematicians and logicians seems ruthless, and some might even deem it to be ethically dubious. Contrary to the expectations of critics, Dobromierz grew up to become a normal person, whatever that might mean, with a family and even an academic career. The Kwiek-Kulik duo's relationship with their son is also borne out by the more rarely mentioned using one's child in one's art. This is the title of a work from 1977, where they made a gallery available to him on his 5th birthday. The exhibition of drawings was kind of gift or reward for using him in the Kulik activities and transformed him into what Ron Duda has described as an independent acting entity. Activities with Dobromir came to a natural end. This was the thing that I mistaken. To a natural end as the child grew up. In 1975, Zofia Kulik noted that, quote, "It's a pity we didn't carry out some of our ideas when Dobromir wasn't mobile, when he was small and unformed, when there would still have been a huge contrast in laying him down on a cold floor. It's too late now," end of quote. On the other hand, she was happy that not all their ideas had been seen through, that some only remained on record in the form of precisely compiled notes. As she sees it, members of the public, quote, "may obtain even more satisfaction since a verbal recall accords them their own visual associations. It is very likely that there will be those amongst them who carry out similar activities of their own, putting makeup on a child, their own dog, and so forth, or who connect a note with an image seen somewhere else entirely," end of quote. As such, activities with Dobromir remains an open work which constantly awaits its continuators. So this is this video out of these photographs from the project. That is the way it is exhibited today. And now I'll switch to the second heroine actually of this paper, Natalia LL. And I will start with showing you some of the works presented recently in one of Warsaw galleries that is a bit earlier than the one that I will be talking about in a moment. But I think it's worth seeing because, it was a communist time, so many of these works of artists, radical communists and feminists were censored. So many of those photographs that were exhibited not so long ago, they were exhibited for the first time. And they are showing kind of interesting thing, which is the sexual intercourse, of the artist with her partner, Andrzej Lachowicz. But also she was delegating this camera performance to her friends, giving them camera and asking to photograph themselves according to instructions during the sexual intercourse. So it was called intimate photography. This is also the artist herself with the partner, Andrzej Lachowicz, and some more of these photographs. So this research on the artists is ongoing, and some of the photographs, as I said, that were not really exhibited under communism are now part of the discourse concerning the 60s and 70s in Polish art. Yeah, so here's the consumer art. This is maybe the most famous work of art by Natalia LL, and it's a quote from the artist. "The mystery of absorbing externality revealed itself to me with such intensity that ever since 1972, all my art has been engaged in a conceptual play on consumption. Of course, the perversity of consumer art was a kind of mocking of the world, of mature concreteness, and so bananas in a compliant and charming mouth could be transformed by our perfidious imagination into penises craving caresses." Well, so in the end of quote, in the array of black and white photos, color photos, and video films constituting her consumer art series, created between 1972 and 1975 under the pseudonym Natalia LL, she usually presents a young woman, or sometimes two young women, in the process of consuming products such as sausages or various kinds, or bananas. When we recall the fact that during the era when the communist economy held sway, those goods were the hallmarks of luxury, and as such were strictly controlled, consumer art might be well considered as documentation of highly uncommon events representing dreams more than reality. This distinguishes it from an earlier series, intimate photography, a documentation of sexual intercourse, as graphic as it is prosaic. However, in consumer art, she was not concerned with the sublimation of pornography or with a critique of political system grounded in controlling even the most basic of goods. Natalia LL numbers amongst the pioneers of feminist art in Poland, and her critique of the patriarchy rapidly found a response amidst female artists, activists, and theorists behind the Iron Curtain. The phallic shape of bananas and Vienna sausages in the hands of mouths and of sexually attractive young women expresses an erotic pleasure with which, as Gisling Nabokowski has remarked, is connected with the liberation of bliss, or may also use this French famous word, jouissance. Although Natalia LL defines herself as a conceptual artist, an ironic distance and sensual pleasure typical of pop art is easy to discern in her consumer art series, as is that fascination with exploring the body, characteristic of body art. She was connected with Wrocław-based Permafo collective, and in carrying out her program of permanent photography, the young women she used as models in her work made her a pioneer of delegated performance art. Her notes from the mid-1970s also give consideration to the use of color photography, which with time approaches a refined monochrome balance between yellow and violet. Such indeed is the case with the series created in 1974, this is the one, as part of her consumer art project. The six portraits depicting one and the same woman are laid out in 2 columns and 3 rows, and the format of each of them is almost a square rectangle, with its horizontal planes forming the longer sides. Each shot is a close-up of the blonde model's head, set centrally against a white background. The makeup is pronounced lipstick, smoky eyes, eyebrows plucked clean and penciled in. The evenly trimmed fringe falls to just above the brows. Thick strands of hair curl the length of face. Together, all this adds to expression to the fairly average face. I think this is an interesting kind of grid that each and every portrait remains kind of part of the larger work, but it's autonomous at the same time. In its entirety, the work is more by way of being typological rather than resembling a sequence of images with a filmic narrative. As opposed to other photographs from the consumer art series, and despite the title, in this sequence the actual act of eating is not depicted. The model is playing with banana, which is intact, although the skin has been peeled back. It was not until the early 21st century that British critics associated this with oral sex. And back to Gisling Nabokowski, who has noted the association with pornography, no matter how transgressive within the context of communism and Catholic bigotry concerning the sphere of sex, turns the attention away from the visual image itself. As with her earlier documentations from this intimate photography and using text in the later works such as Natalia is Sex, Natalia Lachlachowicz's work could be considered as critical analysis, though not lacking in humor or fundamental and even stereotypical visual codes. In making use of the scopophilic pleasure associated with a masculine entity for her own purposes, Natalia LL became recognized as a precursor and the author of iconic feminist works of art. With time, her attitude towards feminism would become more complex. In an interview with art historian Wiesława Wierzchowska in 1994, she said that, and it's a quote, "In a way, I have moved closer to the feminist movement, even though I'm aware of the fact that feminist xenophobia is not so much the liberation of woman as her imprisonment in the grip of the vagina and the uterus. As one half of a divided whole, woman can only find fulfillment with the missing half, in the other words, man." End of quote. You can imagine that this quote was not really liked by many feminist critics, so to speak. Answering the question as to whether and for whom a photograph of a pretty blonde eating a banana carries associations of fellatio and whether this is a good thing is really not so simple. So now we are like going a bit farther in time. It's Zofia Kulik back again with the Splendor of My Serve series from the 1990s. So by 1987, the Kulik duo has run its course. Zofia Kulik then went on to create her archive of gestures, which consisted of hundreds of exposures. She continued to work on it until 1991. The autonomous selection of elements served her in the composition of photomontages. In the early 1990s, the works assumed the form of thematic photographic carpets, alluding to the history of 20th century totalitarianism. Kulik was reducing ideology to ornament and combining a critique of political regimes with a destruction of the patriarchy. She created all the photomontages by hand in the darkroom in her home in the town of Łomianki, not far from Warsaw. Some of them, measuring several dozens square meters, represent months and years of work in the darkroom. Her control over the material was assured by her skills in the field of traditional analog photography and she overcame the technical limitations by dividing the compositions into smaller panels. Set in slender frames and juxtaposed as intended, they create a larger whole. All those photos are black and white. When she was asked about why she had abandoned color, her reply was succinct: "I am a sculptress." As opposed to the color slides from the Kulik years, her independent works can be interpreted as bas-reliefs, where the background is darkness. Between 1997 and 2007, she created a series of self-portraits with the generic title, "The Splendor of Myself." Using the archive of gestures and her photomontage technique, she constructed her own image as queen and ruler. Splendor of Myself consists of 9 panels arranged, the Splendor of Myself 2 that I will be focusing on, consists of 9 panels arranged in three-panel rows. An heretic full frontal portrait, it constitutes a reinterpretation of representations of the Madonna and alludes to Renaissance portrayals of Queen Elizabeth. The wealth of floral and figurative ornamentation commands the attention. Only from close-up do we see that the zigzag patterns are woven from fragments of plants and flowers multiplied dozens and hundreds of times, and from a male figure in all kinds of positions. The model who posed for the male nudes was a friend of Kulik, the artist himself, Zbigniew Libera. In an essay discovering the psyche of Zofia Kulik, art historian Sarah Wilson reflects on Kulik's grammar of ornament before moving on to consider the male body in her work. As she puts it, and this is a quotation from Wilson, "There is evidently a certain delight, an element of the capriccio in this sporting with the male body, a twirl, multiplied, depersonalized, inverted, and distorted," end of quote. Kulik herself had previously stated that a man is a splinter or a fragment. "I can crumble at my own will," end of quote. In the photograph, she gazes straight into the lens, and her head is crowned with thistles, so it's this sort of strange plant that she has on her head. To the right of the crown, as we look at it, there is a Latin cross with the shorter arms cut at an angle, and to the left a sickle. There are further significant elements in the lower sections of the portrait. She has a St. John's wort flower close to her right hand and seems almost to be clasping a cucumber in her left. Above her left wrist is a figure of a young man on all fours. This is her son, obviously Maximilian Dobromierz, referring to the work, to the activities with Dobromierz that you've seen just a moment ago. On the bodice, set as the center of the picture between breasts indicated by cogwheels, is a press photograph complete with caption. It depicts a turbine in an atomic power station in the Soviet Union. The iconographic allusion to the history of art can be considered as a kind of game with the viewer. Kulik gives the impression of maintaining a distance to the world of art over which she is queen. The phallic cucumber interconnects with the delicate down of the St. John's wort. The communist sickle contrasts with the Catholic cross, and all these meanings are set into energetic motion by the Soviet atomic power station. The photographs in Zofia Kulik's Splendor of Myself series can be deemed to conclude the period of her setting accounts with communism in her idioms of the Soc era and the phallocentrism in her All Missiles Are One Missiles, also her very famous works. The narcissistic and decorative nature of her self-portrait stand in contrast with the earlier work, characterized by its political engagement, which she created together with Przemysław Kiek during the Kulik period. The process of her emancipation would reach its conclusion at the Documenta 12 art exhibition held at Wilhelmshohe Palace, it's part of the Documenta, of course, in Kassel in 2007. In one of the exhibition rooms, curators Roger Burgel and Ruth Noack hung Rembrandt portraits alongside Splendor of Myself, too. Cucumber. As you can see, this is how she's like displaying the work. And here is the Wilhelmshohe Schloss with Rembrandt. So I will show you also some of the version of the works. I will not go into details, but there are very significant differences. Like for example, there is partner of of Zofia Kulik, but also her mother in some of her versions that are larger. For example, this is 2007, so 10 years after the Splendor of Myself too. Yeah, this is how it looks one to another. So you can see also the differences in sizes. And this is the partner of Zofia Kulik. After they broke, she turned him into a kind of gardener or like a servant to herself. He's also an artist, so he became a painter, like in his free time. So they are kind of famous couple, but they are no longer together, even though they are living in the same place, close to Warsaw. And of course, Zofia Kulik had some problems with this communist past, that she was too communist for Communist Party. And many people didn't really like it after the collapse of communism. But she's okay now with this. And I don't have time to tell you more about Natalia, but in the 90s she developed a very personal narrative about herself, becoming Brunhilda. This is like a person from the kind of Nordic mythologies, and there was a whole series of performances, video performances, but also photography with herself as Brunhilda. Yeah, so also very powerful feminine figure. And she was also all the time using her partner. This is Andrzej Lechowicz, the same person as from this intimate records from the early 70s and late 60s. This is the man on the left. So he died unfortunately 3 years ago. So this is it. This is my presentation. Thank you and ačiū.